Hello, everyone. This is really wonderful. It's so lovely to see so many of you join us today for what is the first in our new programme of Lunch and Learn sessions for our clients. So I'm Lauren, I head up marketing at CX Partners. And the reason we have this session in today is because we really wanted to have a programme of learning for our clients. Because not only does it mean that we get to share some of our knowledge and expertise with you, but it'll also mean that you get more out of the work that we're doing together, which is brilliant. So this month, we are covering the foundations of user-centered design, and I'm going to hand over to James in just a second. In October, we're going to be doing a session on inclusive design, and we'll send out the details for that in the coming weeks. So we'd love to hear from you, though. As I said, this is our first of these sessions, but I'd love to get some feedback on them. Does the time work well for you? Do you like the format? And of course, what topics would you like to see from us in the future? So you can drop any feedback or thoughts in the chat, which should be at the bottom of your screen, or you can email them to us on the contact details that you used to sign up for today. So moving on to today's session, our speaker today is James Chudley. At CX Partners, he's an experienced director. He has over 20 years of experience in this industry. He's written books on UX. He has founded a UX conference. So he is a brilliant person to lead today's session. And at the end, we'll take your questions as well. So just to let you know that this is a one-way webinar, so no one can see you or hear you. So feel free to scoff your lunch without the fear of anybody being able to see you. And if you have anything that you'd like to ask, add it into that chat or the Q&A along the bottom of your screen. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop back at the end and we'll go through the questions. So now I'm going to hand over to you, James. Thanks very much.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Lauren, and welcome everyone. Good afternoon to you all. And I hope you have got a nice sandwich and a cup of tea. And actually, on the theme of food, I think it's probably wise to think about this as a bit of an amuse-bouche to user-centered design. We've only got half an hour now, so I'm going to cover the basics with you today. But yeah, lovely to meet you all. As Laura mentioned, hello. I work as an experienced director within the public sector team, and have been working in the sort of field of UX for since about '98 when I graduated, doing all sorts of different things, mainly working on digital product design, and that's changed over the years. But have always sort of followed user-centered design practices, and so very, very keen to sort of talk to you a bit more about what that's all about today. In terms of the format of the session, this is the plan for the next 45 minutes or so. What I plan to do is speak for about half an hour, and then really keen to kind of answer your questions. And I think the more questions the better. I'm really keen to kind of understand more about how I can kind of fill in the gaps for you and kind of make sure you get the most from the session. So I wanted to talk about fundamentally what is user-centered design, and why I think it's important, and why it's been important or so important to the work that we do here at CX Partners for such a long time. To talk through some of the benefits, and then just start to talk through some of the practicalities of actually how you go about doing it. Could quite often ask questions like, well, what do you do? How does it work? So very keen to kind of field your questions about those things. And then we've left about 15 minutes at the end to answer your questions. And then at the very end, I've also got a question for you. So yeah, get ready for that. So before I start, just talk a bit about CX Partners, and I know there's a range of people in the room. Some of you are already working with us, so hopefully you've got a good sense of what we do and how we go about doing things. But in terms of the work we do, it kind of fits into probably three broad areas, it's fair to say. We used to do lots of work specifically focusing on digital products. So quite often the briefs we'd get from our clients would be things like, there's something wrong with my website, something's not working within my conversion process, or it might be like an app-related thing, so relating to kind of a specific digital product that we spent lots of time designing specific digital things like redesigning websites and things like that. The scope of the work has changed hugely actually over the years, and now we're spending much more of our time both looking at products that fit within kind of broader services that our clients are offering, but are very much kind of zoomed out in terms of the scope of work that we're doing. So quite often we're spending our time helping to design and optimize services. And interestingly, the nature of those services varies hugely, and very often, particularly with some of the public sector work that we do, lots of those services have non-digital components. So we end up applying these kind of user-centered design approaches that I'll be talking a bit more about today to things that aren't digital things, which is interesting, like paper things, like physical spaces, which is really interesting to kind of illustrate how you can apply these approaches to completely different domains. So in addition to kind of designing better products and services that exist today, we're also very much involved with kind of helping our clients to think about how things might be better in the future for their organizations as well as their users. So this idea of kind of visions and thinking about, well, in an ideal world, what should the experience be when someone's, in this instance, submitting their meter reading to their energy provider, and kind of envisaging this better future, illustrating why those things would be better for the people who use those services, and giving our clients a clear view of what they're aiming for, really, and trying to understand, well, we could do that today, or actually that bit is going to be tricky, and that requires new technology or processes or a new approach, but helping to create those visions. And thirdly, and this one's a really hugely interesting one, because it's a really good example of that kind of zooming out and increasing in scale in terms of the work that we've been doing, and thinking back many years ago when I remember thinking and sweating about, well, what labeling should we use on this button within a conversion process, and then kind of zooming out, and now we're being asked to help organizations to change, and helping organizations to become more user-centered and work out what that means to them, and setting their visions for becoming more user-centered, and helping them to change the way that they work in order to be more user-centered, and helping to change the way they're structured. So huge kind of very much more kind of systemic level problems, if you like, in terms of the scale of the work that we're doing today. But again, all very much kind of grounded in the sorts of techniques I'll be talking about today. And across all of those three things, it's fair to say that we always take a user-centered design approach, and also I think it's fair to say that over the years we've been pretty true to this in terms of we won't work on things if we can't involve users. It's just like a fundamental, really. It would really undermine our philosophy and approach if we were to say, well, you know what, we'll just have a good guess. let's guess what we think people are going to need, and we'll kind of muddle through together. That doesn't end well. I've definitely done that in the past, and it doesn't end well. So this is very much a kind of the approach we always take. So what the hell is user-centered design? Well, it's fair to say it's a couple of things, really. It's certainly a design method, and as UX people, if I can call us all that, we love a confusing diagram. I'm sure you've all seen the absolutely bonkers diagrams that UX people generate. There's double diamonds. I saw a quadruple diamond the other day. Everyone just tries to outdo themselves by adding additional diamonds, and it's hugely complex. And it's always struck me as slightly ironic that an industry that's very much all about simplifying and making things easier for people, and making things more effective, is kind of obsessed with reducing complexity. And certainly in terms of the way that we describe what we do as well. There's lots of acronyms, as there are in lots of other fields, but user-centered design is very much a method. It's a method of doing design, but it's also a design philosophy. It's a way of thinking about an approach you could take, and the right approach in my mind in terms of how you should approach going about doing design. And in terms of, if you were to look up a definition, which is what I did the other day, because you can't do a presentation without a dictionary definition. When thinking about user-centered design as a method, this is what it will tell you. So it's all about this kind of iterative design process, and that idea of iteration is absolutely massively important, because it kind of reinforces the fact that design is never finished. And when I realized that, it was one of the most significant moments of my career, in that you can get bound up with this idea of trying to design the perfect thing. That's quite stressful. I wouldn't recommend it. I think it's the reason why lots of designers burn out, because it's like, I've got to design the perfect thing. That's a nightmare. And it might be, it's hard enough to design the perfect website, let alone designing the perfect organization, which, is a hugely challenging thing to do. So this idea of iteration is very important. Things can be, the concept of continual improvement, I think, is the most important thing you could kind of take from this in some respects, in terms of, things are never finished. We'll always be able to improve things. We'll improve things by involving the people who use them. And if you're on those tracks, you're on the right tracks for success, I think. So it's all about iteration. And it's, a process where, as designers, we're focusing on the people who are going to be using the things that we're building, making, producing, whatever they may be, whether they're paper forms, whether they're buildings, whether they're websites, apps, whatever it might be. And we're doing that throughout the whole of the design process, or as much as we can within the constraints of our project. In terms of kind of a design philosophy, I suppose it's very much grounded in the idea that fundamentally it seems fair enough to say that it stands to reason, really, more in my mind, that the best outcomes will come from designing things with the people who will use them. Like, why wouldn't you involve the people you're designing for in the design process? Why wouldn't you speak to them? Why wouldn't you try and understand what their problems are? It would feel bizarre to not do that. But that's only probably because I've been doing this for a long time. But hopefully you share that sentiment too. And it makes me think about this kind of Charles Eames quote, where he talks about the role of the designer and this idea of like being a good host who anticipates the needs of your guests. Imagine you've got people coming around for dinner, and you might give some thought as to what they might want to eat and what sort of people they are and where you might sit them and what would make them feel comfortable, make them feel happy. And so it's all about this kind of need of this idea of anticipation and thinking on behalf of someone else, and then adapting what you're doing in order to meet their needs. But I was reflecting on this. I used to love this quote. I still like it. But I thought, actually, Charles, you should have tweaked it a bit. It feels like it should be a bit more, not just anticipating, because that feels a bit more like guessing. But why don't you go and find out? If you go out and find out, and you ask people, and you see the problems they're having with your own eyes, you have a full understanding of the issues they have, the needs they have, so that you can then provide for them in the most kind of suitable way. So why is user-centered design important? I think there's lots of reasons, really, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, that I think the concept of guest-centered design and guessing has certainly proved to be unsuccessful. I mean, I've seen a lot of this throughout my career, and I'm sure you have too, in terms of we know what people want, we know what people need, we've got a good idea, we haven't got time to speak to people, the solution has already been defined, we've bought a thing, it's going to do what it does out of the box, it is what it is, tough luck. And then you see the impact of that, when people come to use it, people are getting frustrated, endless help desk calls, people go away and use your competitors' products and services because they're easier, they're better, there's less friction, all of these sorts of things. So guessing is risky. I think that's fair to say, and it's really stressful, and it's not much fun, particularly when kind of reflecting on projects of years gone by where lots of work would be done to kind of launch something very significant, and then literally someone would flip a switch and cross their fingers and wonder what on earth was going to happen, which just feels terrifying. I can't imagine ever doing that again, particularly with the scale of the sorts of things we work on today. So if you try and pin the tail on a donkey, well, best of luck. So, as is always the case with these sorts of presentations, it's interesting to kind of ponder the impact of bad design and how it makes you feel. And this is one that it's a terrible screenshot, by the way. I apologise for that. It's grainy. Anyway, this happened to me the other day, and it happens all the time. I use an iPhone, and this happens, and it literally makes my brain scramble. And I just don't know what to do. I don't know what to press. I don't want to upset the person who I was speaking to originally. I don't want to upset the person who's ringing me. I don't know what to do. And it really is so confusing and frustrating. And this is just one of many examples where, we all encounter things that have been poorly designed in our everyday lives, and we know what it feels like. So I guess the trick is to make sure that we're not then imposing that on the people who are using the products and services that we're wanting them to, given the nature of the work that we're doing. And often the things that we use have been created with the best of intent. I mean, I was looking at a remote control at home the other day, and pondering the thought process as to how that thing might have been designed. And if you don't involve the people who are going to use the things that you create, I think it's fair to say that you come up with things like this. I've just noticed this remote control's got a button called garden on it. I'm now just wondering what this remote control actually does. But in some ways it feels like, the people who are making these things are, it's almost like showing off. It's like, look at all the stuff we've got, look at all the fancy things we can do, look at all of our features. And it makes perfect sense to them because they understand these things. But it's absolutely baffling to the people who use them. And then the flip side is, and this is where the magic happens, is you see these kind of hacks happening when these things get released into the world. And with physical things, of course, you can adapt them to kind of improve them. So in this instance, there's this lovely tweet that's a colleague work shared, where someone had kind of modified a remote control for their, I think for their someone with dementia, and simplified it. So that actually, if this thing had been designed, I think if this thing had been designed with end users in mind, it would have been radically simplified, and it would have prioritized the things that people do most regularly, and made it easy to use those things. And it's really intriguing when you start to see artifacts like this in the world. The way that people have modified things gives you a clue as to how they should have been designed in the first place. A bit like those desire paths you see where people take a shortcut through fields, and it's basically them working out that actually this is the quickest way to get to Tesco's around the back of the field, and I don't want to go down the footpath because it's a really inefficient way to get to those things. So these are good things to look out for when you do your research, because they, as I say, they are clues to say this thing's broken. Someone's had a crack at improving it. They've come up with a genius idea. Steal the ideas and build it into your products. So hopefully some of the kind of benefits of this approach may have already started to come through in terms of the things that I've been talking about. But I think it's fair to say that when you adopt user-centered design, you will end up with better products and services. And crucially, that they'll be solving the right problems. There's no point, and this is a stolen quote from, I think, Peter Drucker, is that there's no point in spending loads of time in perfecting the perfect solution to the wrong problem. Like, there is no point, there's absolutely no point. Just stop straight away. And it's really important to understand what the right problems are that people are having when they're using your products and services, and focus on, clearly focus on improving those things. And then you'll end up with, a better outcomes, of course, for everyone who's using those things. The other really important thing that allows you to do is to kind of build empathy and understanding for the people you're designing for or serving. Regardless of your industry you're working within, there's always going to be, whether it's there'll always be a customer or a citizen or a user who's kind of either paying for the service you provide or using that service. So if you don't understand them and their needs and their wants and the context within which they're using your products and service, you can't design for them. I've always thought, if you don't understand the thing, you can't design for it. It doesn't make sense. So actually, by thinking about people, spending time with people during the design process, you do build empathy for them, and you understand how they see the world, and then what's going to work for them and what's really not going to work for them. So it helps you make decisions to the design process. And making decisions is something that organizations are really bad at, and it's hard because often there's loads of risk and there's lots of unknowns and there's lots of uncertainty, and that creates inertia and it slows things down. And we all know that, like we all see that, I'm sure, every day in the work that we do. But if you involve people in the design process, then you can have a better rationale for your decision making, and almost in some respects, defer the decisions to your users and say, well, we're thinking of doing these things. What do we think would work? Could we put some of these things in front of people? Can we kind of get a sense of what may have, a better chance of working more than other things? So it's about reducing risk, and that has to be a good thing. The other thing that I think often people don't really think about is how much kind of innovation comes from involving people in the design process. You learn so much that you could never have imagined. I mean, the amount of times that I've sort of just had my mind completely blown by listening to people when they've been trying to use the sorts of things that I've been working on. And all, my preconceptions have just been blown out of the water. And they start to kind of uncover things that you could have never imagined. They start to kind of give you clues and hints as to what this thing should do for them and what features this thing should do. And I think it's fair to say that, these people will have better ideas than designers. There's this misconception that designers, this concept of like the genius designer who will, given any problem, will come up with a genius solution. I've sort of come to realize more recently that designers have more of a kind of a facilitation role in terms of, linking ideas or linking people, real end users, with proposed solutions and understanding from them, and acting almost like a translator to understand what their needs actually are and translating their needs into potential design solutions. So often the research we do, I think, is very much about harvesting these things. Lauren, can you still see my screen? I just my Evernote just attacked my screen.
Yeah, we can.
Awesome. Sorry, everyone. Blame Evernote. Okay, so spotting unmet needs is brilliant, and actually, this is fascinating, and this is part of why this process is so amazing, because you never know what people are going to tell you, and they'll always tell you things you never expected. And you'll be like, "That's genius. That's absolute genius. Of course, we need to go in this direction." And I suppose a really fundamental important point here is that if you can make the people you're serving happy, whether you call them your citizens or your customers or your users or however you describe them, if they're happy, it's always going to result in a happy organization. What's good for the user is always good for the organization. It's going to help you. If you're a commercial organization, it's going to help you with loyalty, retention. It will really help you to make sure you're not losing people to your competitors and give you a competitive advantage. And if you're a public sector organization, it really helps you to kind of helps with credibility. I mean, that's an important thing in terms of if I don't have an alternative as to use a certain government service, it helps with credibility. But it just has so many benefits, and it just makes so much sense, and it will always kind of pay back to the organization. So I talked a bit about method earlier, and I've got a few slides a bit around the kind of the how. So I thought it'd be interesting to go through some of these just to kind of bring it to life a bit. When you're doing design, often it feels like this, and this is something that's been kind of is described as the design squirrel, and it was first coined by a chap called Damon Newman. And early in the design process of anything, it feels like there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of uncertainty, and it kind of can feel quite chaotic because you don't really know what you need to do, and essentially spend lots of time understanding, listening, watching, thinking, coming up with hypotheses, having assumptions. There's no real clear sense of direction. But as you go through the design process and start trying out ideas and working out what works and what doesn't work, you end up with this simplification and this kind of clarity and focus around exactly what you should be doing that will help to address the needs of your users as well as meeting the objectives of the organization you're working for. But I'm sure this kind of messy feeling is familiar with lots of you, and it's something that we often talk about a lot when we're doing our discovery work, because it does feel messy, it does feel chaotic. There's lots of anxiety flying around. No one knows what's going to happen next. It feels like sometimes driving through the fog, you can see, you've got good visibility of like a couple of meters in front of you, but as to what's around the corner, you've got absolutely no idea. So it can feel stressful. And when you're going through this process, typically you'll start off by, particularly if you're following a user-centered design process, you say, well, we're not going to rush to a solution. We don't really know. We know a bit about the problem we're trying to solve. We think we're trying to solve the right problem, but actually what we're going to go and do is go out into the world, talk to people who are involved with this in any way, shape or form, understand what their real problems are, what they're trying to do, what their pain points are, what their ideas are for solving that problem, and just hear their stories, build empathy, build an understanding. And often this is generally what happens within the user design process, and we call it kind of a discovery phase. So you commit a period of time to doing exactly that, just going out into the world and learning. And it's all about learning. And you may hold some hypotheses in your mind. You may have an inkling as to what's actually going on, but this is where you keep an open mind and you say, well, actually, I'm just going to go and speak to someone and find out. So this is all about learning. And you go out and you conduct research, and there's loads of different methods which you do that. We kind of do that through, in fact, I think I've got some pictures to show you. Here we go. So quite often now, clearly through the pandemic, we were forced to use a different method and actually transformed the way that we did research. We used to get lots of people into our office and do usability testing sessions or research sessions one-to-one in a lab, or what we called a lab, essentially just an office with some TV cameras in it. But that's all gone remote, which has had huge advantages in terms of the breadth of our research and the ability to kind of access people who we may not have been able to access for whatever reason in the past. Lots of different ways of doing this. Sometimes it's using these sorts of formats. This is an indication of how things may have looked in the old world a little more in terms of observation rooms and people watching research happening and taking notes and making observations and having their minds blown about the reality of people's lives and their preconceptions and watching their products and services fail, which is brutal but important, and better to fail when it's a prototype than when you've spent millions and millions of pounds refining and perfecting something that's possibly not as good as it could have been. And also going out into the world. So much of the research that we do has been with people in their own environments, you know, watching them, being with them while they're trying to use things, do things, seeing the impact of their environment on the things that they're doing, understanding the things that really work for them and the things that just fundamentally fail. And you know, that's a real privilege to be able to do that, but it's just wonderful. It's so fascinating and insightful, and such a valuable way of learning. And then typically what we'll do, you know, this is an instance for some, it's me on the right hand side there, an instance from a fascinating project where we were helping, helping to a private hospital organisation to understand their entire patient journey. And so we spent lots of time in the hospitals, understanding the environment, understanding what the patient experience was like, and gathering stories and quotes that we could play back to the client so that they understood what life was like to be their customer. And that's typically, you know, the process, the way this thing works. So our job is very much a messenger. You know, we go out to the world, we speak to customers, we speak to users, and we replay that information back to a client to build empathy and understanding. And yeah, we're very much kind of the middleman in that situation. So that's a really interesting, certainly a privileged perspective to have, but hugely insightful. So gathering this kind of evidence and then bringing it back, and then from that, synthesizing everything we've learned, identifying some of the key problems that people are having, identifying some of the key ideas people have shared with us that sound like potential things to try out, and then from there, kind of taking some of those ideas that feel like they have the most chance of success, based on the signals we've heard in our research, the evidence we've seen, and just trying those things out. So taking these, you know, best ideas again, but taking these best ideas back out into the world. So it's like, and very much the mindset is like, what's the smallest thing we could do to find out whether this feels like it will solve a problem? It's all about fake it before you make it. It's all about prototyping. It's all about being efficient, because what's the point in spending loads of time in pursuing a terrible idea? You know, it doesn't make any sense. So this is very much the sentiment here. So, you know, building prototypes. This was one of my favorite examples for when Metrobus was launched in Bristol, which was a new bus service. We went to a park and ride, and we prototyped a bus stop or a ticket machine within a bus stop. And it was literally, as you can see here, it was like a big cardboard box with bits of paper. And, you know, we'd sketched out a potential interface for this ticket machine. And Anna there, who's in the Hive Eye, had a flip chart with lots of different sketches on it, which were essentially different interfaces. And Chappie with the glasses was like the user who was coming to get his ticket. And as he was pressing on the bit of paper, Anna would play the role of the computer, flip over a piece of paper and say, right, if you've done this, you'd see this screen next. This is what happens. What do you think about this? Is this what you expected to see? All these sorts of things to try and understand how this person expected these things to work, so we could then redesign it in a way that makes it more intuitive and easy to use. So clearly, us drawing on some pieces of paper and building a cardboard box took a bit of time, but it took nowhere near as much time as it could have been to program this thing or make it for real. And then anything that didn't work, we just threw it in the bin, and it was, you know, no real expense expended. So a really fascinating way of working. It's really good fun, and there's no reason why you can't do this. You know, hacking stuff together is great. It's never been easier. Prototyping stuff has never been easier, and it doesn't have to be complicated. Drawing things on bits of paper is hugely effective. And then, of course, from there, when you get a sense of what's going to work and what's going to be feasible and realistic and achievable, then you start to develop your ideas and make them for real. But again, you never stop involving the users in that process. Going back to that sentiment of, you know, things are never finished. You can always improve things. So it's not that you get users involved at the beginning and then it kind of tapers off. They should always be involved. They should, you know, things are never finished. They should always be continually improving. So we're nearly at time. In fact, I think we are at time for that half an hour. I just wanted to kind of leave you with 3 key takeaways, which really made me think about food, which makes me even more jealous of you all sat there eating your sandwiches. But fundamentally, you know, this is a really key thing. This could be a tattoo, actually. I'm not sure I'll go that far, but who knows? You know, you are not your customer. You are privileged in ways of, you know, you've got so much more information about the way that your products and services work that your customers could never have and would never want to have and you'd never expect to have. So it's so important to kind of keep reminding everyone you work with, like, it's all well and good, but we are not the customer, we're not the user. We need to kind of find out from them. They, you know, treat them as almost like the ultimate decision maker, if you like. And, you know, it's all about seeing the world's through their eyes. The second of three is, this fundamentally, this makes your life easier. It will help to reduce that kind of decision paralysis. It will really help you make decisions, and it will help to reduce risk. You'll go out to the world, you'll gather evidence, it will make you feel more confident about the decisions you're making and allow you to move on. And this is all about incremental change, and that idea of progression is hugely valuable, of course, to everything that we're all working on. And finally, be that person in the room who's sort of deliberately asking the question, saying, well, have we involved users in this process? Or, just act as that kind of person that's reminding people that, this is the right thing to do. This is the way that should be working. And it doesn't have to be a big deal. It doesn't have to be massively expensive or time consuming or arduous. It can be quick and simple to do it. But, it's really important to be the advocate of the user and help to encourage these sorts of behaviors within your own organization. So thanks very much, everyone. I'd love to hear your questions.
Thanks.
Hi, Lauren.
Hi, I'm back. Thanks so much, James. That was brilliant. Yes, as you said, please add any questions that you have either into the Q&A or the chat, either one. We can see them both. And I will start posing them to James now. So first question is, how do you go about finding people to conduct research with?
That's a very good question. So quite often on our projects, we use quite a formal approach to finding people, because we have, essentially there's always budget set aside to recruit people and to find the right people, because there's, of course, it's very important to find the right people with the right problems, I guess, given the nature of whatever it is you're working on. So there's lots of independent recruitment agencies that you can use to do this, and so typically we'll create a recruitment brief in collaboration with a client to define exactly the sorts of people we want to talk to. That's both from a kind of demographic point of view as well as a situation that they're in that has that chimes with the problem we're trying to solve. And then we'll brief a recruiter who will then go and find those people for us based on their databases and networks, and then provide us with lists of people that we then use for within our research. So I've described that's quite kind of formal route. Sometimes clients have panels of people that are already kind of sort of pre-approved, but they've already kind of got this in hand because they've got quite an established research practice. But in the past, we've adopted more what has often been called kind of guerrilla techniques, which just basically means, well, we don't have a budget for doing user research. We're on a real shoestring, so we need to go and find some humans to talk to. And often I've walked into coffee shops with a laptop and some money to buy people cups of coffee, and just bothered people and said, look, I think I might pretend to be a student or something. But yeah, just said, look, can I show you something? I'm working on something. Love to get your feedback. This has been a good tactic. We've worked on lots of projects in the travel industry. So if we're trying to improve a rail ticketing or whatever it may be, then there may be people in waiting rooms, or work we've done in airports. So people who've basically got nothing better to do for exchange for a couple of quid or a cup of coffee, then they'll help. But that's very much the exception. Very much now it's the more formal route, but it basically gives you the best chance of getting good participants, which is what you want. And if we start doing recruitment, if we start running sessions and it turns out the person isn't quite what they may have led us to believe, then we just kind of can the sessions. But yeah, lots of ways now.
And what do you tend to ask them once you've recruited them? What sort of questions would you pose to them?
Well, I guess the way that works during a recruitment session, during a research session, is there's always some kind of key things that we want to learn. So there's lots of questions that focus on that key thing. So and those key things will be a combination of things that are absolutely mission critical to the success of the thing that we're working on. So we have to make sure those are woven in there somewhere, in terms of, we create this thing called a discussion guide. It's like a script that we have, which is a kind of a reminder really for the people who are running the research session. So when you're facilitating a session, you run through this script. And if we were running a research session here, I'd have it on a piece of paper, and it would just make sure that I was kind of staying true to what I was trying to learn. It's a useful reminder, because often with research sessions, you end up talking about stuff you never imagined, because that's the nature of conversation, of course, and that's the way it goes. But often it's a a bunch of questions around understanding the person and their context and their background and their experience within the realms of what you're looking to learn more about, then often there's like an activity or a task. So imagine we were working on optimizing like a shopping journey on an e-commerce site, for example. Often that person would have been recruited because, oh, actually they're trying to buy a new car at the minute. You're like, oh, I understand you're trying to buy a new car. Tell me a bit more about it. What's the car for? What's the situation? Why do you need a new car? All the kind of background stuff that gives you the context. And then you can throw back to that during that process, like, oh yeah, you mentioned you had a dog. Like, do you need to make, what does that mean, or whatever it may be? And it kind of helps build a bit of rapport as well between you and the participant. And really, then it's kind of a session where they show you and they take the lead, and they try to do the thing that you're interested in. Other times it's more broader things. It's about their experiences and their life stories. If it's more about kind of a service, for example, it's understanding what's happened to them in the past and understanding things that have gone wrong and that have worked really well. Very much kind of a conversational thing, but you've always got some key questions that kind of keep you honest, but make sure that you learn what you need to learn.
Great, lovely, thank you. I think we've got one final question, unless anybody's got any more that you want to add do so now. But the last question I've got is how do you get this sort of program kick-started within an organization?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because I think sometimes it can feel overwhelming, or like, crikey, it's where do you start? Does it feel too big? And I think the joy of this sort of approach is that it doesn't have to be huge. I mean, just starting to kind of almost acknowledge the idea and float the idea that wouldn't it be sensible. I mean, imagine you're in almost like the worst case scenario. It's like you're very keen on guest-centered design. You're like a proponent of guessing, and it's just like, we know best. No one's interested in the voice of people who are using our products and services, which is not uncommon, and certainly was not common a few years ago. But starting to kind of be an advocate for this approach and start to show people the benefits of doing it. So it shouldn't be difficult to start harnessing the thoughts and opinions of people who are using products and services, and doing a bit of this work. Often I've seen people just go and do it. What's stopping you from showing, spending time with your users, understanding what it is the problems they're having, and also kind of gathering evidence from reviews and kind of evidence that things aren't working, saying, well, it's clear there's a problem here. And it seems to be the case that people are thinking this, and we're seeing some weird behaviour within our products and services. We don't know what's going on. We're hearing strange things from our call centres. People are complaining about these things. There's all these kind of indicators of stuff going wrong, and there's loads of evidence of the benefits of these approaches. And I guess showing people this body of evidence and saying, what about if we just tried something out as a bit of an experiment? What if we did a little bit of research? What if we put some of these sketches for a new idea in front of some people? It could even be people from another department. Start small. You just want that kind of, get these kind of light bulb moments where I remember being sat in a research session with a marketing director, and he was cynical. Like, he was totally cynical about what we were doing. He didn't see the value in it. It's just like, it's a waste of time. And I sat in an observation room with him, and he was watching people trying to buy food from his website, and he was watching them fail and get frustrated. And he turned around to me and said, I would have never believed that had I not seen it with my own eyes. And it was like amazing. He was a complete convert. It was like, well, we're always going to work in this way again in the future, because it's the obvious thing to do. Why haven't we done this before? It's this incredible thing. So I almost think like trying to kind of create those scenarios within your organizations, create research opportunities, invite people along to watch it. And then you're not the person who's telling them what you've seen. You're just the person who's made it happen, and you're making that connection between the people who are making these services and products and the people who are using them, and then just stand back, let the magic happen, and then it kind of sorts itself out. So, but yeah, start small.
Yeah, I loved what you said earlier about, user-centered design is really about reducing risk, and so making that known organization-wide is really important. So we've actually had a couple more questions through while
wicked.
So first of all, someone asked if that you could just reflect back on those 3 summary points that you at the end. They missed the second one, so could you just refresh our memories on what those were?
Yeah, so I'll go through them just slowly here. So fundamentally, this kind of nice sentiment, the tattoo idea, you are, or maybe a car sticker, you are not your customer. So fundamentally, you may spend, even though we spend lots of time with the customers of our clients. We're still not the customers. We have a good understanding of their needs, but we are not them, and we'll never be them. So that's a really important thing to do. And so if you understand that and people accept that, then it makes it really easy to do research and involve them in the design process. The second one was the point you just made, really, actually, about this makes your life easier. Life's hard. Make it easier. And by going out and involving people in the design process, you'll make it easier to make decisions and fundamentally reduce risk. And then finally, be that person who asked the loaded question. Did we involve it? This is a really interesting idea. Did we? Oh, we didn't. And then play that game. And you don't have to be difficult, but it's healthy. It's healthy, and it's lovely. What's lovely is that when you start asking that question, and then later in the process you hear other people asking the question, and you've planted the seed, and you can pat yourself on the back. Job done. That was the three.
Perfect. Thank you. And this session has been recorded, and we can also share the slides afterwards. So if there's anything else that anybody missed, do either flag it now, or we can send those both out to you afterwards. So we've got one final question from David. Thank you, David. So how do you keep users engaged? So is there some sort of reward, or is it just goodwill? He's keen to understand the methods here and genuine user engagement based on that, valuing the user contribution to user design.
Great, thanks, David. Thanks for the question. Appreciate that. So often when we're sometimes we can't incentivize the people who we're conducting research with. It's more often the case that we can and we do. So the way that works with the kind of more formal recruitment is that people are paid an incentive to get involved with the sector. So that varies depending on the nature of what we're doing and how long we're speaking to them for, and who they are, and what how much their time is perceived to be worth, I guess. But often people are incentivized to do that. Often, actually, in other situations, then it's not appropriate to pay people for their time. I think some work we've been doing within the NHS recently. It wasn't deemed appropriate to pay healthcare professionals for their time, which seems harsh. But it was just the nature of the beast. It just wasn't a done thing, if you like. And so sometimes people are offered non-financial incentives to get involved with things. Often in other projects, because of the nature of the work that we're doing, people are really keen to get involved because they want to be proactively involved with improving things. But often it's the case that we want to, I guess from our point of view, we want to maximise the chances of the best people being involved. So often, and no shows and things are frustrating. So it's on a goodwill basis. Sometimes that can kind of slow things up a little bit, make things a bit tricky. So it really varies based on the nature of the work. Sometimes that if you don't incentivize it, you'll never get the engagement, and it won't happen because there's lots of research going on, of course, and I'm sure we're all approached by people on a regular basis to get involved with research. So that can be quite challenging. I hope, Dave, that answered your question. Feel free to drop any more questions in the chat if there's any more.
Wonderful. Well, I think that's everything I've got to ask you, James, but I believe you had a question for the group that you wanted to pose as well.
I did, yeah, my turn. It's my turn to ask a question. I'm just going to get rid of this little panel. Yeah, so I just have one question, and to build on something you mentioned, Lauren, actually, it's almost like a challenge to yourselves, actually, in terms of, how could you, within the context of your work, involve users more in improving the products and services you work on. So it may be the case that you're working within an organisation where there's a very healthy kind of research culture and a very established user-centred design culture where this thing is just happening all the time and it's just totally standard. Or it may be the case that the whole concept of involving people. I mean, I heard a lovely one the other day from a client who would just be like, well, if we, and this wasn't from them directly, this was like the sentiment within the organisation. It's like, well, if we involve people, we're going to have to do what they ask us to do. It's like kind of taking that customer's always right, but to the extreme. It's like, well, no, it's not about that. It's a different thing. So this might be a difficult thing to try and introduce within the context of where you work. But yeah, think about how you can involve users improving the products and services you work on. It could be the smallest possible thing, but that could be the beginnings of helping to really establish this as the norm within your organisations. So yeah, that's what I'd leave you with today.
Lovely. Thank you so much for today's session, James. Thank you everybody who's joined us, and that's a great question to ponder and us to leave you with. As I said at the start, we'd love to hear your feedback, so please do get in touch and let us know your thoughts on today and any future topics that you'd love to see from us. And I hope that we see you at next month's talk. Thanks everyone. Bye bye.
Thanks so much. Bye bye.